Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. Puddles and I are here at Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania, with a longtime friend, Mr. Mark Lusk, Dr. Mark Lusk.
No, just Mr.
Mr.?
Just Mr.
That's like me. I'm a master's.
There you go.
Are you a master's?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
All right.
Got my performance certificate from Northwestern
All right.
after I wasn't able to finish there.
Completed?
Yeah.
We first met back in 1984 at Northwestern. You were in your doctoral program.
Right. Just
And
started.
you were there, and then I was finishing my undergrad and stayed on for a master's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mark, it's great to.
Well, it's great to have you here. You know, we've been talking about this for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
and our mutual friend Kevin McManus, I think, had
Mm-hmm.
convinced you that we should talk, and after all this time, and you know, you and I were talking. You were saying, "Well, can we do this around Labor Days?" And I said, "Well, Mike,
There's this tradition of
there's
Labor
this
Day
thing that happens around Labor Days," and so it's been so great to have you here
Yeah.
as part of this Penn State Trombone Labor Days. It's been really awesome to have you and to
Yeah.
play with you today. It was just such a treat.
And along the way, you had some experiences with Arnold Jacobs.
Absolutely. When I got to Northwestern, as you all know, it was 84 through 86, and so that was a transitionary time for Mr. Jacobs. You know, he was able to play a lot of the time, but there were times when he was a little more challenging for him to play, and so he was, you know, kind of in that transition, and of course Rex Martin was doing such a great job of stepping in and taking care of business when he needed to. But
You were telling me that you had maybe first experienced his teaching at some of the Northwestern master classes.
you know, I've seen so many of your interviews, and so many folks have, you know, made their way to study with Jake,
Mm-hmm.
you know, from all over the planet. For me, as a Northwestern doctoral student with a TA in the jazz program, this was the time when Jake started doing those seminars at the end of the school year, right? It was
during
like
the summertime.
It was like during the summertime, and so I actually never, not embarrassed to say a little bit, I never actually took lessons with Mr. Jacobs, but I participated in those seminars as much as I could, and you know, because I could as a doctoral student and not, you know, have to pay the fees and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So and I just believe, and I found that I think he was so good at that. You know, those multiple day kind of events. I think you were at them as well. Did you film them too?
I recorded them, yeah. Many of them.
So then you know as well as anybody how good he was at that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and in a way, you pretty much got all of the main mantras and the main ideas that were part of his great teaching legacy, and so I feel very privileged to have participated in those. I have some really fond memories from some of those. You were asking me about things that I remembered from those classes, and of course just the opportunity to see him work and talk, and to, you know, so effortlessly move from the mechanics of things to the artistic side, and just the, you know, the way he could balance it out. It was like few people ever, you know, did it any better, really. But I remember two stories in particular. I remember we were in, I can't remember if it was the first one or the second one or whichever one it was that I was noticing, but it was a few days into it, like maybe 2 days into it, and he hadn't said anything about warming up, right? And you know, that's always like,
It's always a big
it's
question.
like a,
What's
it's like,
your warm-up?
Right, exactly.
What's your secret?
And so at that point, no, he hadn't said anything about it. And so somebody, I forget who it was, said, Mr. Jacobs, how do you warm up? And he kind of paused for a minute, and he said, well, I don't really warm up. He said, because I never really wore them down, he said. Which I thought was it just like a bolt of lightning hit me, you know. And he began to make, as you've heard many times, you know, his argument that so much of it is muscle memory. And, you know, you cannot ride a bike. He used the bike analogy where you could have not ridden a bike in years, in decades. And you can get on a bike and you can ride it. Well, how do you do that, you know? I mean, there's so much involved with pedaling and steering and balancing and braking and, you know, how do you, well, it's all muscle memory. It's all right there. And so I think for, you know, great musicians, experienced musicians like he was, it was always just right there, you know. And it just really hit me, and it made you realize how, we'll talk a little bit more about this later probably, but, you know, so many of the great teachers, you know, it's all about efficiency, and it's all about being able to simplify things and keep things in order. Yeah. And in his case, of course, song is always first, and sound, and having that idea so potently forward before you ever play. And so I remember that hit me.
Well, you mentioned it last night, that something you tell your students all the time is, in order to
we got to keep him back. Yeah, we got to keep him up.
in order to affect your audience, to move your audience, to connect with your audience musically, you have to believe in what you're.
Absolutely, one of my mantras.
Yeah.
One of my mantras I've tried to preach over all these years is just that you can't expect your music to mean something to somebody if it doesn't mean anything to you. And so I think that's really important.
That's great. So I remember in one of my early lessons with Jake, speaking of the warm-up, I had this very elongated warm-up during which I did not necessarily expect much out of myself in terms of quality. I was just checking boxes. I've got to do my tonguing, I have to do my scales, I have to do my long tones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But it wasn't necessarily, it was because I was warming up, I didn't necessarily expect quality. And so one of my early lessons with him, he discovered this, and it just completely changed my outlook. And so warm-up really was transformed into just daily routine, where every note you played should or could be your best.
Beautiful, yeah.
So maybe that's what he was getting at also.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he was so, and I've tried my whole career as well to have that sort of organization to my teaching. You know, across the room from us here are two filing cabinets, and I use those two filing cabinets as an imagery all the time about musical things versus technical things. Yeah. You know, and I think Jake was so great at that. You know, he had things in their place. You know, it wasn't like, you know, our kids' closets, you know, where they go in and it's just like it's all in there, but it's just like a mess, you know. He always knew what file to go to. He had that organization, so it totally makes sense to me that he was very particular about what was warm up and what was routine. I know for me, I will refer to that in my teaching, that you want to make sure your practice sessions are either functional or practice sessions or performance sessions. And you just posted something the other day about, I think Jake would always try to encourage people that sometimes you just got to like put it all away and just play.
Yeah, you got to practice performing.
That's right.
Yeah,
so you have those very defined kind of practice sessions, and try not to let them bleed together, where you're kind of half performing and half practicing, or half warming up or half playing. You know, it's like, but that was the master of Arnold Jacobs, was his ability to break it all down for everybody. You know.
Yeah.
And another story from those classes, if you don't mind,
please.
that I remember. You know, we would all go to Symphony Hall and we'd hear the brass section. I mean, that's one of the reasons we were all there, right? Was to go hear and play, and they'd start the first song and it'd be like, wow, there's that brass section, and then just as the night went on, it just seemed to get bigger and stronger and more magical as the night went on, and so I don't remember who it was, but they come up and they play the Ride of the Valkyries. We'd gotten into some people playing different excerpts and solos and things, and so somebody came up to play the Ride of the Valkyries, and they were doing their darndest to play big and strong, and just the way they heard Arnold Jacobs play in the hall, and so problem is it was louder than they could play. They were driving faster than they could drive, and so everything was kind of off on it. The rhythm was off, the accuracy was off, pitch, everything was kind of like a little off, right? Yeah. And so Mr. Jacobs could have certainly gotten into any one of those topics, but in the genius teacher that he was, he just kindly stepped back. And I noticed this kind of thing because I knew that's what I wanted to do in my life. And so I often say that I didn't study with Jake, I studied Jake. Same thing with Dr. Marcellus or some of the other, Mr. Crisafulli. I didn't study with Mr. Crisafulli. I studied Mr. Crisafulli. That's what my goal was. So anyway, he so graciously, with this young person, said, now look, I know you come to hear the orchestra, and you hear us playing big and strong and full, and but I've been playing for 45 years. I've been playing the Ride of the Valkyries for 45 years or longer. That's the way I remember it. It may not be the way it went down. You may find the recording and it's a little different, but that's kind of the way I remember it. And he was like, I've been doing this a really long time. I've learned how to play it that big over a long period of time. Don't try to do this too fast. Play it good, play with a good sound, a good rhythm, a good pitch, all the good qualities that you want to play with.
Yeah.
And over the course of time, it'll be the sound that, the volume that you want to play at. But for now, take care of the details. Yeah. And I just thought, man, I was just like, brilliant. I thought this is why this guy is who he is.
That reminds me that he was all about practicing with excellence all the time. So finding the point at which you can play it with excellence, whether it's slower, it's faster, it's higher, it's lower, whatever, it tongued or slurred, whatever you need to change in order to make it great. And then slowly you add in more of the complicating factors over time, but you're always taking excellence with you.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Yeah, beautifully said.
So I think that sounds very much what he was asking.
Yeah, I think that was his thing. And again, I was talking earlier about I had the pleasure of doing a class. I was teaching at the Lawrence. No, I was teaching here, but I had taught at the Lawrence Conservatory before I came to Northwestern, before I came to Chicago. And some years later, my good friend John Daniel invited me to be a part of the retreat that the brass students do at Lawrence University up in the upper part of Wisconsin. Yeah. And so I got to do this myself and Vince Chikowitz. And this is one of the last things that he did. So he in this retreat was much like Jake in those classes. I probably saw him work with 20 different trumpet players and brass musicians, and every time he was able to find that person's point, their connection point, and he would get to his mantra, which was brass playing is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple, which I think is that's what made those guys so great. Is they all kind of, they were all trying to preach the same gospel, so to speak, maybe just different different takes on it.
I think I mentioned this to you over the phone when we spoke about a month ago. In reference to this, there's a quote I have prominently displayed and with Chikowitz, and it's something to the effect that trumpet playing is easy, getting out of the way, is the hard part. Like just making your focusing your thoughts.
Yeah, that's like the mirror image of it. He's saying the same thing, just keeping it simple, trying to stay out of, don't complicate it, just try to keep it easy and or keep it simple, and but it's not easy. It's hard work. So
that's great.
This idea of the naturalness and the simplest, a simple approach is so positive. You and I talked about it, and I thought it'd be I'd love the opportunity to this is my take on when I was young and I went to Eastman. Now Mr. Remington had passed away. I was not a student of Mr. Remington, but very much inspired by, influenced by. You couldn't be a student at Eastman in the starting in 1976 without, he had just passed away, and
I'm sure his influence was still
absolutely
present.
it was palpable, and so a lot of the players I played with had studied with him and so forth, and so as a young brass player, I'm sure you remember, we were all dealing with this dichotomy that was going on, because we all heard from Jake. Especially that first generation of Jake's students had taken it to the limit as far as like full capacity, breathing, full capacity all the time, which was an important lesson to learn. But yet we were all trying to balance that with what we had heard from the Remington school, where, he had actually said that you could play the trombone on a conversational breath. Luckily, at a very young age, but certainly through the years, I feel like I've really got a handle on the fact that, they were talking about exactly the same thing. Jake wasn't talking about maximum capacity above all things. Not at all. He was just trying to make sure that your breath was as efficient as possible. Again, that idea that the baby breathes, just full capacity, but you don't even hear it. That we walk around breathing just fine all day long. It's usually when we grab an instrument, when we start to breathe weird, do something kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
And I think that Mr. Remington was exactly the same thing. That's what he meant about the conversational breath. It had nothing to do with the amount of air. It was that the conversational breath that's what you do all day long. There's no sound in it. There's no tension in it.
Interesting. Yeah.
We talk and we breathe and we sing and we dance and we run and and our breathing just does what it needs to do, which is exactly what Jake was trying to get everybody to do. Now again, just like sometimes those first generations that studied with Mr. Remington or studied with Jake, sometimes they would so enthusiastically run with whatever they heard that, sometimes I think it ended up being like two ends of an extreme. Yeah. But I think those guys were actually right there in the middle. I think they were saying the same thing.
Interesting.
And, and when I began to realize that as a player and as a teacher, it made me just understand just how great teachers
they were.
They were.
Yeah.
They really, truly were. And that in combination with a phrase that I heard from the great Slide Hampton a few years later, which was kind of a nice bow to tie it all up with. He said, in a class I heard him say, he said, the trombone's the most natural instrument in the world to play if you approach it naturally. And it's the most unnatural instrument in the world to play if you approach it unnaturally. And I think that seemed to tie just so many things about Jake and Remington and all that. So I appreciate you letting me kind of say that, because I think there's a lot of folks that have often got out of sorts because they're trying too hard to have that maximum sort of capacity, which is not what he meant at all. No. Or they're trying to be so easy about it that they don't have the support and what they need. So it's an important thing to talk about.
I think so, and one of the things that I've come across since doing this TPTV project over the last 9 years is there is, I think, a misunderstanding of the Jacobs idea. When he would talk about maximal breathing, it was really training yourself to be able to access that when you needed it. But he was a preacher of breathing to the needs of the phrase.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not always, one size fits all. That was as far away from Jacobs as you could get. One size fits all.
Right.
And so but practicing frog to tip type of breathing, but not applying that just on everything. It's just when you needed it. For us, in those low, loud, Bruckner moments or something, or Strauss passages, we had the skill set to access that air, but it was not involved in every application. It was not supposed to be that. It was breathe to the needs of the phrase. And his one thing was just to try and stay above half, breathe in have the top 2/3, leave the bottom third as a reserve, in case something, the conductor does something weird, something goes wrong, and it messes up your breathing scheme. You have that reserve built in.
Yeah.
But you didn't have to be at the top, just somewhere, whatever, what was ever natural.
Yeah. He wasn't one of those folks that would drive his car down to E. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Although with him, he was not so much. He was really interested in gadgets, but I don't think he ever lifted the hood of his car, for a few years. I remember talking about that. So, well, this is great. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark, one of the great things about watching you play last night and then today was to see you go from tenor trombone to bass trombone, back to tenor, back to bass, back to tenor, and really, you didn't have any testing notes or warm-up notes going through. You just and your articulation, the sound was immediate. It reminded me of how Jacobs, from my conversations with trombone players, bass trombone players and tenor trombone players, and those who were trying to do both, was he evaluated the situation as it's just the trombone. And so I'm wondering, how do you go about this so effortlessly?
Well, I appreciate that. Over the last couple of days, I did indeed play bass trombone and large bore tenor trombone and small bore trombone, and anything from playing lead to playing solos to. There was a lot involved with this weekend, and I think. Again, at the end of the day, sort of like Mr. Jacobs, I think it's like one of those things that you try to get control over what you need to have under control, and then you just don't want to overthink it. You know what I mean? If you start thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm going to this, I'm going to that, when I'm not going to have any notes to play or any, I just don't really think about any of that. I just try to put the song first. Always, I try to recognize that it's not really about the chops at all. To me, it's all about having the right amount of air. It's like you take that mouthpiece and you put it under. I think of fluid dynamics a lot of times. Like you take your C tuba mouthpiece and you put it under the water and you turn it up enough to where it's just the right amount of, where it's full. It's full, but it's coming out the throat of the mouthpiece, not a drop, just totally efficiently, right? Mm-hmm. Now you leave that water stream like that, and then you take your smaller F tuba mouthpiece, let's say, and you put that under the same stream, and all of a sudden it kind of like bubbles over and, creates all kinds of issues, right? And there's not even that much water coming out of the throat of the mouthpiece anymore because it's all kind of, well, that to me is what I think about. And so I just try to have the right amount of air from one instrument to the other and make that adjustment. And I credit that all to Mr. Jacobs, I think, and all the players in Chicago. I think were such masters at that. They really were. I mean, they, whether it's Jay picking up all the different trombones he would play, or Mr. Jacobs, or looking down the row and watching Mr. Herseth do that, with all the trumpets and everything he would play. It's that was a important lesson to learn. So,
yeah. You spent some time. You were there when Mr. Kleinhammer retired, and so I remember seeing you play with the CSO.
Yeah, it was.
What was that like?
Talk about dumb luck. I mean, and it's important to realize that, like we tell our students all the time, you just got to work hard and be ready for that opportunity because you never know when it's going to come. When I went to Chicago, I knew I had to go to Chicago because I knew that in spite of all the playing things I was doing, I knew that I wanted to do what you and I have gotten to do for our life, teach at the university, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I thought, well, I can't really teach brass today without going to Chicago and finding what the hell's going on out there. Eastman was one thing, but I mean, Chicago was the place to go and find it all out. And so I end up there. I get there in September. I win the civic job, and Painter features me with maybe we'll get to tell that Painter story somewhere. Painter features me with his wind ensemble, and October, Mr. Kleinhammer says, "Hey, I think I'm done."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now as a civic person, that was technically the deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you were going to get a chance to play with the orchestra,
right?
So, but Mr. Crisafulli had some faith in me, and he gave me that opportunity. They gave me that opportunity to go down there and play. And there was the 50th anniversary of Ravinia.
Yeah.
And so my first week with the orchestra was with Kurt Mazur. He was still at the Gewandhaus at that time. But Kurt Mazur conducting Brahms 1 and 2 on Thursday and 3 and 4 on Saturday. That was my first week. And I think I was telling you the story about when I first sat in there, I kind of thought they were messing with me. Now they had done that on Woody's band. It was kind of like a little bit of a hazing thing that they would do with Woody's band. And so I thought, well, this is the Chicago Symphony version of this, I guess. I sat down and I played in orchestras and, certainly had my experiences. And I thought, I think I kind of know what's going on here. And I sat down and we started to play. And Mr. Jacobs is right here, and Mr. Crisafulli's over here, like 95 years of experience on either side of me. It's like, that's not enough to scare the hell out of you. I don't know what it is. But I'm sitting there, and they start to play, and I don't hear anybody. I literally don't hear them playing. And this is what it seemed like to me, anyway. And, again, we were talking earlier about how you go to hear them in the hall, and it'd be like, like right there, right? And here I am playing, and I don't hear anybody. And I think they've got to be messing with me here. They've got to be messing with the young guy, And then I realized, no, they're not. No, they're not. What they were doing was they were demonstrating beyond just in an amazing way the idea of projection. I think those guys knew what they sounded like in every seat of Symphony Hall. I think they knew what they sounded like in every chair at Ravinia, every nook and cranny. Mm-hmm. I think they knew. And so their sound was gone. And of course that gets us to the articulation of Mr. Jacobs. But I always use the analogy. To me, it kind of felt, once I figured it out, it was like the old cartoon with the tortoise and the hare, all the versions of that you've seen, where it's like the hare is like gone, and the turtle's like sitting there on the starting line. I realized that's kind of what my sound was like. My sound was just like, sitting there, and they're gone. They're gone. So,
their sound was out in the hall.
Yeah, and I'm still treading water back there on the stage.
Yeah.
And another part of that experience of that sound being gone was, I think, the thing I probably most fondly remember. Scary at first, but realizing how magical it was. And I've heard you talk with so many people on Tuba TV about Mr. Jacobs' famous articulation. It was magical. It was absolutely magical. You're sitting next to it. I must admit, it's kind of like, your bones rattle a little bit. It's like never ugly, never ever harsh, ugly, or anything. Just that, just that simple clarity that was always there.
Yeah.
And on that horn, it's like to do that on that horn. It's like, wow.
Yeah, big horn.
Wow. And so I've had a chance to play a few times with Don Harry in Buffalo, and he had that, he had that kind of thing going on. But so it was all about that clarity, and you realize that he never had to play that loud, really, because of that articulation, because of the clarity of that articulation. He was always there.
Mm-hmm.
His sound was always there. And I played with so many wonderful tuba players, Phil Cinder, all kinds of great, wonderful players that I've been blessed to play with, and they all seem to have gotten to that point where they're all, it's part of our arsenal, right? I played tuba on Broadway, and same kind of thing. It's like that's part of the arsenal. Is you need to have that Jake clarity of attack, but it's not just the clarity too. Sorry,
he's back.
It's not just the clarity; it's the timing, right?
Yeah,
like
just that immediate sound.
Yeah, and just ever so slightly ahead, like whatever millisecond it is that you guys do this. It's like it's amazing. It really is amazing, and it's scary, meaning that. And when I said scary earlier, that's kind of what I meant. It was like getting used to that, because you thought, man, am I like behind the beat, and you realize, no, you're okay. That's just what they do. That's what the great ones do. They have just that ever when they need it, right? It's like playing with the great lead trumpet players, right? And they sit down in the pitch, they're right down there in the center lower part of the pitch all the time. Just big sounds, the Byron Striplings of the world, and the Roger Ingrams, and even Herseth, just right down in the middle of it until he needed that thing, that little gear. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, just
that little gear where all of a sudden it gets just a little bit higher in that note, and all of a sudden it's gone. I mean, it's in control.
Yeah.
And it takes a while as a low brass player to not run with that. Like when you hear them do that, to like you kind of want to do that too, but you don't. You kind of stay where you are and just let them kind of lift and separate. That's pretty magical stuff. And that's similar to this, the great tubist. I don't know who did it before Jake. Bill Bell, I don't know who all did it before Jake, but I just know that Jake was such a master at being able to make sure that he was right where he needed to be at any given moment.
I suppose that, there are some recordings of the Philadelphia Orchestra with Tchaikovsky with Jacobs' teacher, Philip Donatelli. And when you listen to those, you can hear Jacobs' sound model with him, this Italian tuba player.
Sure.
There's some qualities about Donatelli's sound that we recognize in Jacobs' sound.
Yeah.
But
Which might come from that Italian opera tradition,
Yeah.
you know, because
Oh,
they're
yeah.
always like,
yeah,
way out on top of it. So
Yeah.
maybe that's I never
Yeah.
thought about that. That's really great.
I think getting one of the things with Jacobs' articulation is he really was all about blowing air to or from the lips, and not to the tongue, and then getting the air past the tongue, which is much more difficult in the trombone setting because you have to tongue everything.
Right. Yeah.
But but for him, getting the immediacy of sound was a result of getting the air immediately to the lips, and so he would articulate, but he would minimize the consonant and maximize the vowel. He would say that great sound is found in the study of the vowel, not the consonant.
Sure. Right.
So that was, I think, part of his secret.
Yeah.
And I know that Jay Friedman talks about this from time to time as well, just
Yeah.
his observations.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Well, they tolerated me for a little while. I mean, I got this job at Penn State in 1986, and so I ended up having to leave Northwestern I'd finished all my work, all my coursework. I was nothing but dissertation, and then came here. There were 4 low brass majors, I think, when I got here, and 5 years later there were like 40 low brass majors, and we had started having the family and everything else, and luckily I didn't have to have the degree to keep teaching here, and so I was able to use my credits and earn. I didn't want to leave Northwestern without anything, so I got that certificate, and but that time with the orchestra was so special, and my last week with them was a little tour with pictures at an exhibition. Now Jake wasn't playing then. Regretfully, Max was playing, or Rex was playing. Sorry, Rex was playing, which pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
But just to sit and watch, the piccolo and everything, what a thrill that was.
Yeah.
And then I finished that, and I was off to do the 50th anniversary recording with Woody's band.
That's great.
But that was the great thing about the bass trombone. You could do those kinds of things without changing a mouthpiece, without changing a horn, without nothing.
Yep.
Which is I feel like a very, very lucky person to have had my experiences in Chicago with big bands and with the contemporary music and with the symphony and just with great musicians like yourself and Mark Fisher and so many wonderful, wonderful people that I got to meet and play with there. And we kind of got serious about a little bit of trombone choir there at Northwestern for a little bit, which was pretty exciting for me because that kind of wasn't necessarily a thing.
It wasn't, yeah.
But we got to do it for a little while, which was nice. So,
yeah.
Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have us in. To talk about your experiences, and Puddles always, make sure I bring a gift, and so here's a little.
Oh, awesome!
Tuba People TV, or maybe in this case, Trombone People.
Oh, it's okay.
TV.
It's all right. It's all right.
Class.
Well, I think we should go fill this up somewhere.
That sounds good. It's not dishwasher safe, so just
okay.
Hand wash it to keep the lettering on. we don't buy the good lettering. Mark, it's so great to see you.
Yeah,
it's been 35 years.
It's great.
Probably since Civic.
Yeah.
Probably since Civic.
Yeah. Awesome.
So great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers. And now back to you.